Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the City Council, City of Lamarque, Texas, 4 p.m., January 14, 2019. We're having a workshop. Let the record reflect that all members of council are present. Under item 3A, presentation discussion given by Clark Condon and Associates, Inc., providing architectural designs associated with the proposed improvements for the Lamarque I-45 corridor and intersection enhancements, and provide direction to the city manager. Whoever my spokesperson is, you're welcome to come up.
Letty's going to pass up what I'm going to have up here on the screen for you guys.
Great, thank you.
Closer. And then
Thank you.
sit down there. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Thank you. Okay?
Is his mic on?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. My name is Jason Miller. I'm a principal and a partner at Clark Condon Associates with my team, Letty, who's been working on this project with me, and then Brandon, who's our project manager as we go forward. We've all been working on this presentation and working with Colleen and her team on looking at these options for you. Some of this presentation, Colleen and her group have seen a little bit of it before, so we're going to start from there so everybody gets the same look and feel. But what we were tasked with was, we've done some of this similar type of work on 45 with Texas City, which is your partner to the north. Looking at aesthetics, opportunities for identity, branding, things like that. We've also done it for other places like the city of Pearland, Sugar Land, Stafford, all over town. So the first thing we wanted to do is how can that be translated to what you guys are doing and what TxDOT's doing through your corridor over the long stretch that you guys have, because you have a longer stretch than most. So just a real quick agenda. I'm going to run through that packet that you have in front of you. We're going to talk a little bit about the existing conditions and the site analysis of that. Talk a little about the programming of what TxDOT's doing and what we can do on top of that. And then get a little deeper into some of the aesthetics of the corridor and how we can change those, and then talk a little bit at the end about how we can translate the branding that you guys have and some of the logo stuff that you guys have done into environmental graphics that can help brand for you guys off of 45. And then at the end, we put together an overall big picture budget. If you were to do everything in this packet, this is what it would be. But knowing full well that it's probably going to be a shopping list. So just keep that in mind when you look at that, because it's a pretty big number if you did the whole thing. The other thing is we're going to be looking at is partnerships with like TxDOT and things like that for landscape and stuff like that. So first, looking at site analysis, and this is the portion that Colleen and her group have seen already. This is what you've seen today. So that first page is basically precedent or existing images of what the corridor looks like today. So obviously TxDOT doesn't do a great job of maintaining and cleaning up and mowing and things like that. So over long periods of time, you end up with, although the infrastructure still works, the aesthetics of it aren't as pleasing as you would want it to be. So this is kind of our starting point today. The good thing is, even if we do nothing, which is the next couple slides, what TxDOT's doing is going to be a drastic improvement. So we're already starting off on the right foot. Looking at your city limits, which are shown here in blue with a red outline, we highlighted a few things that we wanted to take advantage of. Obviously, there's reasons why you want to get people to draw into Lamarque. Obviously, like you said, your tagline is the gateway to the Gulf. So looking at opportunities for that. You have 6 major intersections that are going to be going on through this TxDOT improvements that we want to be able to take advantage of. There are numerous areas of signage. You have the civic core that you're trying to draw people to, which is some of that purple dots, which kind of where we're standing today, and then part of your economic corridor, which is up on the north end, and really taking advantage of the north and south ends of the city to really draw you in and tell you, and give you an idea, an identity to jump off the highway and come into the community. Some of the big things that you'll see on here, obviously the corridors down the middle, you have a lot of rail, you have a lot of major thoroughfares that cut through here, and then you have parks all through the community that we would be destinations for people. So that's kind of our starting point. Looking at what TxDOT is already planning on doing, one of their big things, obviously, like we said, is there going to be 6 major intersections that they're redoing, and you guys probably already know this. We've identified on here in orange with the numbers, they're already increasing the amount of identity signage or wayfinding signage on the highway for you guys. But I think one of the big things that Colleen and I have been talking about that we want to really push TxDOT on is, to the north of this, there's not much coming south on 45. How do we get them before we get into Lamarque? They did a pretty good job of doing this coming north on 45, but not so much on the south, coming south. So hitting them before we get to the city limits is going to be the key with the signage itself. But other than that, they have increased the amount that has Lamarque listed on them.
Is number 8 and 9, are those still going to be like that, where it's got Texas City listed first?
These are currently what they show on their schematic. They're only at 30%. We have not gotten an updated drawing set from them, so we'll be able to update this when we see that. Right now, we're going based on what their schematic says, and this is what it says.
We had discussed before, any place where, well, actually number 7 too, any place where they were where both cities are listed, putting Lamarque first.
Okay.
It's a subliminal suggestion,
Yeah.
but it's also alphabetical.
Yeah.
That was the reasoning that the individual gave that made that suggestion, and if that helps sway it, that would be good.
Okay.
Put us first.
Okay. Well, like I said, we've just used what they have out publicly right now. We're working with them to try to get more information on some of this, because they have, like I said, they're working on their 30% drawing set for most of the corridor. The only piece that they're pretty much complete with is the 1764 intersection. So that's the only one we know for sure what they're talking about. But we can definitely look into it once they get that set updated and push them to go another direction. Like we said, we have to have a whole conversation about signage in general.
Can you remind everybody about the 3 different letting schedules and why 1764 is important?
So, as you know, they're currently working on everything north of the bayou, going above Texas City. That's under construction today, which is like League City and those things up there. Texas City is the next section, and that goes all the way to your first intersection, which is 1764. That project is already let, meaning if we do anything or make any changes to that, it's basically a change order to their contract. So everything we've done for Texas City and things like that, they're doing a change order to that contract to get it incorporated. The good thing that you guys have going for you is everything south of 1764 is in design, meaning they're at different levels. Right now, the big portion of it is 30%, I think is what they were telling us. So anything we can get into their drawing set before they bid it, or before they let it, is what they call it, that'll be a benefit to you guys, because you're going to get a better pricing. Change orders are always a higher cost, as you guys know, than, say, bidding it the first time. So our goal is to try to work with you guys to get as much of this that you guys want to do that TxDOT can incorporate into their set early on, so that you save money, you get the benefit of a big contract like they're going to spend. But on the signage aspect, that's just one of those items we need to work with them and see what they're doing and see if they've responded to the comments that you've already given them. So, one thing which you guys have seen it probably all over the place, but as you come down 45, but one thing we wanted to point out was they are improving the corridor. So you're going to go from those first images that we saw, which were, no aesthetic to it at all, to what they have what they call their green ribbon standard, or green ribbon corridors throughout the Houston region, and they're broken into 3 different areas. So everything north, I think, of I-10 is what they call their vertical scheme, which is basically based on the piney woods. So everything's vertical. You see a lot of tree ID and things like that. Everything to the west is based on the Katy Perry, so it's a lot of horizontal schemes and horizontal things on the wall. And then everything south of Beltway 8 especially is what they call their wave scheme. It's all based on the Gulf. It's all based on the water. So you've seen this being applied elsewhere as you go north on 45 already today. So they're applying the blue color to their outside beams, they're applying their wave on the columns and the walls and in the barriers. And then they're actually putting in concrete pavers throughout underneath the overpasses and things like that. They are redoing a lot of the signals. I know one of the conversations we've had is we want to upgrade them to maybe a painted color or black or something like that, where they're just going to put in the standard gray. So the key to this is, and then even the sound walls are going to have that same thing, which is the bottom right-hand corner of those images. But the key to this is that they are improving the corridor some. But what we want to do is overlay that to not just be regional like TxDOT's trying to do from Houston to Galveston and have a consistency. We want it to have this overlay to it that pops for Lamarque and gets people to stop here and get off the highway and come here. So looking at some of the programming for you guys, which is an overlay to what TxDOT's already doing, we pulled some precedent imagery of things that have happened and things we've done, things we have in design currently for different areas. So there's things like doing illuminated street signs off those poles. So when you pull them up to an intersection, it's pretty self-evident. It's not just a small blade sign. Enhanced planting along the corridors, enhanced signals with paint that are painted black or to go along with the schemes. And then those two large images on here are images that we have generated for Pearland. So this is what they're implementing along their corridor in 288. So McCard and 518. So they have a big identity marker, pavers, same thing with the wall schemes and detention ponds, landscape, everything. Similar here, looking at, you've seen what Webster's done, you can do the similar thing. They're going to be creating some detention ponds, so there's an opportunity there, especially playing off the whole water aspect of it, is because we can over-excavate those and have a standing water aspect of it, create a pond with a fountain, so it kind of ties the whole water idea. Branding and identity, so this is an intersection concept we've done for Texas City that they like and they're possibly going with, and again, it's more of the landscape. So this is kind of the idea and the gambit of things that you can touch relative to either working with TxDOT or after TxDOT's done with their project. So looking at, again, we're back to that same plan, looking at your corridor, one big thing we wanted to take away going for the proposed portion of this is those 6 intersections. We want to hit on those specifically, but then the 3 magenta stars that you see on there are big for what we want to talk about. Those are probably your 3 big locations where we want to try to do maybe a large identity marker. We're not exactly sure. We don't have designs for that yet. We just have locations right now, but those are probably your first places where you want to grab people and say, hey, this is what we are, this is what we're about. And then we'll go into looking at each one of those intersections now. So this is the first one at 1764. So the trick with the first couple of these that we want to point out is the city limits for Lamarque and Texas City run straight down the middle of the highway. So that doesn't really work very well for when you're trying to brand an intersection, one side one side the other. So what we would think is to try to take the opportunity here, because Texas City's branding exercise that they ran through stopped before this. They went to the flyover. They're trying to draw people into the flyover into Texas City up there. So this becomes the first opportunity for you guys to make it your own. So going forward, what we're showing on here is the stars. One, we're showing the open stars because that's on the Texas City side, and then the proposed stars are on your side. But the green is where we possibly landscape. The stars are potential locations for identity. The dashed red lines along the wall are where we could do some stuff on those MSC panels like Vishal and the Webster ID. The brown is where we were talking about enhancing or taking the paver idea that they're doing and coming up with a paver scheme and color that's specifically to you guys. Doing some additional underbridge lighting, enhancing those for pedestrians and people driving through there. Those can always really be dark spaces. They only put in basically security lighting, so it's very minimal. And then we've highlighted the areas where we want to do enhanced signals. The key to this is, I think, having a conversation, if this is the direction we want to go, is having a conversation early on with Texas City and say, hey guys, we're talking about enhancing this. We want to do it on our own. It'll be an upgrade to what's there today. This is the first space for you guys. They're not planning on doing anything at this moment there. I think the only trick is obviously you'd be spending some money outside your city limits, which could be tricky, I know. But we want to point that out because I think it's going to be easier to try to market this intersection as the entry into Texas or into Lamarque if we can do both sides of it and not just do half. And half on the MSU panels for the TxDOT may be a little tricky. They may not like that. We haven't had that conversation yet, but it's just something to keep in mind. The next one, Delaney. You'll see this intersection again. We used it as a typical because it had a little bit of everything in it. So we show some enhanced renderings later on. But the key here is all the same stuff. You have the same issue with the city limits running down the middle of the road. Identity is the same. All the things are the same on this intersection. It's just a little bit different configuration. But the idea here is the detention ponds. So if we have detention ponds, can we over excavate those? Can we turn them into amenities for you that draw people in and show that that you have enhancements throughout the corridor? Texas Ave, this one's a little more straightforward. Again, the trick on this one is that when you get to some of these smaller intersections, they have turn lanes in the direction of the traffic. So if you're looking at this on the top right and the bottom left, you can see how they added a turn lane to use to make the U-turn. So you run out of space really quickly to try to do an identity marker. So that's why we have them flanking on either side. So you'll see that identity marker location as you're coming across. It'll be sticking up above the highway, but you will have everything else other than detention on this one. Which one's this? Sorry, I'm blind. I need new glasses. I cannot see that far. This one is similar to Delaney in the sense that it has all those same aspects with the detention on it. The key thing that you pick up here is there's a portion where they start to have the sound wall, and that's the orange line you see on the screen on the left. So when we get further into the details, you'll see how we have some options on how you can treat that as well to brand it and make it an identity feature for you. But everything else, for the most part, is the same aspect, same program, same items. All right, this one is where Main and Lake come together. So this is a very interesting intersection because they're bringing both of them together at the same time. One thing that I'm sure that you guys are not a fan of, they're using this in lieu of bringing Bayou through the corridor. So Bayou now is going to tee into the freeway. So then they push you to Main to this intersection to go underneath. And I think the reason why that is because if they had another overpass, they can't get up and down with their geometry that they want for the highway. So that's my assumption on this part. But what this does open up for us is a bigger opportunity right in the center of the city to do that. That's what that pink star is a place for us to do another large identity piece on that large green space right in the center of the city. So this could be one of your key intersections for branding and identity at the middle, especially with all the stuff you're going to have underneath there. It could be a large piece that you're going to remember if you're coming through here. And the last one, it's more of a interchange, for lack of a better term, but it has everything but detention on it. So again, you have a lot of space to do that large identity coming in from the south. You have a whole lot more sound wall because you have a lot of residential down there. So you have a really big opportunity for that, those improvements. And then you can do the large and the small on all four corners. So you could really hit this one with big impact coming from the south. So we're gonna keep zooming in is pretty much what I would call it. So if you think about starting in space and 30,000 feet and then you're coming in for a landing, this is what we're doing. So on the corridor aesthetics, we're looking at it in more detail. So like I said, we picked Delaney just because it had everything on it. And what you're looking at here is if you enhance those areas, what they could possibly be. So that the detention ponds that they have, We could go in and excavate the bottom of those and have a space where they have standing water and they have fountains in them. We're doing that in other places. It works. They're floating fountain features, so they're mobile. They can be maintained pretty easily.
I really like that feature.
Back on the ones I was showing you with Texas City's talking about doing some, Pearland's doing them. They're doing that a lot, and it doesn't just look like a green divot in the ground. So it makes it a whole lot more of an amenity, especially when you landscape around them as well. Because you get off here and you turn right and it's just two big green holes in the ground. It's not really much of an amenity for you guys. To enhance that, what we're talking about is right at the intersections, and this is typical of what we're talking about for all the intersections. It may be in a little different configuration depending on which one you're at, but the idea is the same. So you're seeing enhanced paving underneath there with the pavers, the lighting, again, the signals. But where you start to see the detail in here, it's hard to see on the screen. I'm glad we have the 11x17s for you, is the planting itself. So we start to have the planting schemes right up against where you're stopped, you're walking, where you have the people slowed down. You start to have that higher detail or high detail planting. You see this all over town, Sugar Land, any of those places. And what we're talking about here, and we'll talk about a little bit what the planting is, but those are where we're talking about more the high-end planting that you would have to be maintaining on a more regular basis. Big picture-wise, when you start to zoom out, the spaces between intersections, really what we're talking about for you guys, because I know budget can always be an issue, because some of this, when you start doing over and above what TxDOT's already doing, they're going to talk about maintenance agreements, they're going to talk about what you're doing over and above what they're already maintaining. They're going to maintain it like you see it out there today, so if you want it maintained to a certain level to obviously enhance for your community, you're going to have to take some responsibility, and that's what they're going to require of you guys. But what we're suggesting is using some of their basic stuff, which is their planting, which you see all over the place, is that mass planting, where they go in and put big swaths of different plant material together. Kind of reforesting is what they really call it. And what we're talking about between intersections where we don't have the enhanced planting, creating pockets that are on a regular basis so it continues the landscape theme throughout the corridor, but base it on something that's standard for TxDOT, so it'd be less of an issue for them, where we're just going to work with them on what the plant material is in it.
Are there parameters on what kind of plants they will allow?
There are very few that they won't allow if you're maintaining it. They have their standards that they like to do, but what we would want to do is try to gear this towards the region that you guys are in and something that works for you guys, and that's what this next slide is. So as an example, we pulled out with one of those enhanced planting areas, and the theme that we would want to go with you guys, because I know I've heard a couple comments about, stay away from the whole kind of palm tree kind of look and feel. Well, this is playing off the other aspect that you have on the coast, which is like the coastal prairie or the coastal, like the grasslands of along the coast. So looking at a grass mix with pulling in some plant material that you have along water, so like irises and things like that, so you get flowering, repetitive flowering. This is not like seasonal color. This isn't something you're changing out every 3 months or anything like that. This is something that's going to give you different textures, different colors throughout the year, but it ties to the coast. It's not pulling in palms, it's not doing that side of it, but it's still playing off the coastal prairie kind of feel. And then pulling in some of the crepe myrtles instead of palms to give you some vertical, but also give you a lot of impact with color. And that shows you what could happen right at those intersections, give you that high impact, high color aspect. And then down at the bottom, when we get to those mass planting areas, typically what we try to do is stick with things that are regional, things that can maintain themselves. They're not high maintenance. TxDOT's going to like that, because typically what they do, and if you go that route with them, is they basically install irrigation on those things to get them established, and after a year or so, they shut it off. So if we could do the same thing, but get it to the scheme that fits your community, then you can even shut it off, and maybe you only have to maintain irrigation or something like that on the intersections. But those are the ideas that we're talking about generally for the landscape treatments throughout the corridor. Enhancing those intersections and then just providing a plant palette that fits with those mass plantings throughout the rest of the corridor. When you look at the other part of those, the biggest other piece of those intersections that you're going to see a lot of is paving. So they're already, like I said, installing pavers in these areas already. So the key for us is to look at what can we do to make it stand out for you guys. So looking at a herringbone pattern, we think fits some of the historic nature that you guys are trying to pull with the whole tie to like the French and the aspect of it, and the whole thing from some of the New Orleans look and feel. So what we're looking at with that is keeping with the herringbone pattern that they're probably going to use anyway. But when we change the paver to what I would call, what they call a tumbled paver, which is, if you've ever seen a concrete paver, I have a couple we can look at too, if you want to pull those out. A standard paver is, it's pretty engineered, hard edges and things like that. But they basically take that paver and they run it through almost like a concrete mixer. It kind of tumbles them, makes them look old and things like that. So when you put that pattern together, it gives you a much richer, a much more historic look and feel. So looking at that may tie us back a little, give us more tie back to that kind of historic piece of that we're trying to go with, instead of this hard, crisp, clean design and idea. And then we threw there's 4 different ideas, and what we're thinking with that is, instead of just having single color through that whole thing, look at some of the blends that you can get. So you have antique buff, which is basically a mix of their buff color and charcoal, and then antique terracotta, which is their terracotta color mixed with I think dark brown or charcoal. And then the 2 interesting ones to me are, they have a couple that are mixed with 3 different colors: red, charcoal, and tan, and then red, brown, and tan. So you kind of get those model effect underneath the bridge, as opposed to just one solid massive red, I think is what they would normally use.
Do we have to absorb the cost of these pavers? Let's assume.
The key is no. What we would try to do is do everything that they're normally doing now and just change the color. What they may try to do is if there's any upcharge for say the tumbling or the blend color, that's the difference. You would pay the difference for any upcharge.
Today, TxDOT has a bunch of this over on the island in some spots and where the turns are, the semis just run up over them. And they put these pavers in sand. There was no cement base or anything to stabilize it, and they are just tore up and they look like, you know what.
Yeah.
Is there another installation method that could be used? I mean, I know there is.
Yeah.
You don't have to just use sand. That's great if you got a stable soil and everything, but it kind of shifts down here.
Yeah.
And,
So there's two ways to answer that. So one thing is TxDOT is now doing, because they know they have issues like that, they have changed, and you can kind of see it on those images. See where they have the larger, wider kind of curb areas? They've gone in and installed, what is it, a 2-foot? They want 2-foot wide curbs basically along these whole U-turns. So if cars jump over it or trucks jump over it, they're running over a monolithic curb instead of the pavers. The other thing that we like to do, but it's a significant increase in cost, because TxDOT standard detail is basically going with a crushed concrete base that's basically loose. They go in and compact that in, and then they put the sand base with the pavers on it. That's their standard detail. When we do pavers like this or anywhere else in a roadway or anything like that, we suggest you go in with a concrete underneath all of it. So it's basically like a concrete sidewalk underneath the whole thing. You do have a sand setting bed, which is how they get it all level and everything like that. And then they use polymeric sand, which binds it up a little bit more. That installation holds up a whole lot better than what I think you're talking about, but it adds a significant cost because you're talking about concrete in every place you see underneath that.
what about concrete and the imprints?
Color concrete
It's not necessarily a staining, but it's your pattern imprints.
integral color.
You have your stencils made, and then it's put in at the time when
Yeah, so-
cement's poured.
Yep.
And that's actually cheaper than the pavers.
True. The only issue is they don't have that as a standard detail, so you would pay for that. They would call that an upgrade. I'm with you. I know some of this is, I mean, it doesn't mean we can't ask them for that, but yes, we've done that before too, where you do stamp color concrete.
Yeah.
And you just pick a pattern, you could pick the same pattern as what we're talking about for the pavers and figure out what integral color we want to do and stamp it. But again, they're still pouring concrete through that whole area. Now, again, that may be an argument we could have with TxDOT, if that's a direction we want to push them. I'm just not sure where we would end with the price point. They may try to charge you, they would definitely charge you for the color. I'm just not sure what the offset or the delta would be between what they're already doing and now. But we can look into that.
It's worth a look,
Yeah.
because it's a lower cost. Initially, it's a lower cost going in.
Yeah, because I mean, if you do the detail that they're doing now, it's probably about a break even, because they're not doing concrete at all. They're just doing the crushed base and the pavers on top. And pavers usually run in the neighborhood of $350 a square foot, and their crushed base is probably another $1. If you do concrete or any kind of concrete at all, you're going to be running $5 and $6 a square foot. And then you add a color to it, you add another $1, pattern, you add another $1 usually. So you're going to probably be in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 a square foot for stamp color concrete. And that's the same thing, what we're talking about. Our detail usually increases the cost a lot too, because then you add concrete underneath pavers that you're already paying. You pay $5.50 for the concrete, and then you pay $3.50 for the pavers. You're at the same thing, $8, $10.
So are you saying that if we use their technique, there's a good shot that at no cost to us, we could pick some color
Yep.
patterns?
So, because if they're already doing pavers, and we just say, hey, can we use this color paver, this blend, it could be no cost.
Wow.
Because they're already doing it. Now, the trick is what you're talking about, is longevity, because you're right, even though they install it this way, it doesn't mean they're gonna maintain it the way you want it to be maintained. That's why when we make suggestions like this, and we did this for Texas City, we suggested putting concrete under all of it. Of course, we changed this up quite a bit on their version, because that's what they wanted, but it just adds cost. It adds cost to you guys. There may be a delta there where you would get a whole lot cheaper than if you would go do it yourself, because TxDOT's already doing it, and they're already gonna, deduct what they were gonna do anyway. So you may get it at a cheaper cost than you would normally do it, but it is gonna be a cost to you guys for anything they consider an upgrade or a change.
If they do 2-foot wide curbs, that would help.
They do.
too.
That is standard now, is what we've been told by everybody in TxDOT. So, and that's what you're starting to see in those areas. Anywhere there's a curve, especially on the U-turns, they're putting that in, on both the inside and the outside.
And actually, what they're gonna start doing as well, found out working with Texas City, is where you see the gap in the middle, where you have that big 2-foot curve coming up and it stops and goes back to a 6-inch curve. Now they're actually, where they're doing pavers, they're gonna require that 2-foot curve to be around
All the way the
entire
whole
area
thing.
as well.
So that's a benefit, and it'll reduce some of what you're talking about, but it's not gonna eliminate it totally. I mean, I'm sure you guys have the same thing down here with tow trucks and all those guys jumping the curb and sitting under there. So anytime you get turning on those pavers, especially with heavier equipment, that's when you have that issue. But there's many different ways we can go. So it's all about how much money you want to spend.
And using their technique, when do we have to pick color schemes? What's the timeline?
So TxDOT gave us a letter that had January 30th, I think, in it for a lot of this stuff.
I received it.
Yeah. So the way we're going about this with them is, I think the majority of that, the January 30th deadline is mainly for 1764, is the way I interpret it, because that's already under a contract.
Sure.
And they want to see that done quickly. The fact that they're already doing pavers and you changing colors is probably not on their high priority list, because they're about 2 years from anywhere near having pavers, but they want to procure them as soon as possible, because prices always increase.
Gotcha.
So the soon as we can pick a color, the soon as we can pick a pattern, we would want to include it in a packet to them. So our next step, and what we usually do with all of this, is we go through a process like this with design and concepts and ideas and get what you guys want. Then we usually have to turn that into some sort of construction document set that we send to TxDOT. And they either incorporate it as a change order, or in this case, on half of this, they're going to try to incorporate it into the drawing set that they bid. They want to know what you're doing as soon as they can, because they want to know if it affects what they're doing. So they put you under a higher deadline than they have of themselves, because realistically, like Brandon was saying, they're at 30%. They don't even know what these overpasses look like yet, for the most part, at 30%. They're basically trying to figure out where the alignments are. So for them to really say that we need to be 100% by January 30th is a little bit ridiculous, but we do need to respond by January 30th with something. So my assumption would be to respond with majority of this packet to them, with as much of the selections that we can make, so that we can then show them the progress that we're making, and they'll start taking this more and more serious. It's just that they don't want to be surprised and have to go back and change stuff.
Which color do you guys like?
I prefer one of those two in the middle, because it gives you a little bit more modeling, and because these are large areas, so that you get 3 color blend in that blend. But key to remember, these are all standard colors from Pavestone, so we're not going and picking a random colors and things like that. The only real uptick for any of this would be the tumbling. That would be an additional thing for them. The color itself is pretty straightforward. You can get off the shelf Old Town Blend or any of those colors. It's just the tumbling is going to be the added thing for them, because they wouldn't normally tumble the pavers.
And you said they already decided on a herringbone pattern, right?
I think herringbone is their standard.
It's their standard.
Okay.
Yeah. And with the schemes that you guys are talking about, with the historic kind of feel like that, it just feels more of a design if you just do standard running bond and things like that. Plus, back to your conversation that you're having with maintenance and things like that, herringbone is much more of an interlocking pattern, so it works better than if cars are running over it at all, than say a running bond or something that's not interlocking.
Yeah, both those middle colors are nice.
Yeah.
Georgia has some more reds to it that, it allows, the more color you got, the more your landscape you can do with it.
And one thing we can do with that too is we can get actual samples of all those, if that's the direction you guys like, and show you both,
Yeah.
and you can see which one you like.
I'd like to see both.
Yeah. So both, you like the ones with the 3 color blends as opposed to just a 2 color blend? And I'm pretty sure that the difference between the Old Town and the Georgia is they switch from a dark brown as in the mix to a charcoal. So one looks like goes to almost black, the other one goes to a brown. So it lightens it up a little bit. But it's still the red and it's still the buff, I believe.
Cool.
Okay. All right. So getting even deeper into this and looking at what we could talk about, and this is where you're going to have a lot of options and a lot of things to think about and pick from, is talk about branding. So there's a couple different places we can include branding throughout this corridor. The big one that you're going to see is just like that middle image where Webster did it on the side of the MSC walls. And MSC walls are basically the veneer over their retaining for all the bridges. The other aspect that they have that are vertical walls like this are their sound walls, and they're basically built very similar. There's just nothing behind the sound wall other than the houses. So, but the panels are very similar. And we pulled these images based on a couple different things. You can look at different ways of doing this. One is they've painted it on. There's painted versions on here. There's imprinted versions with color applied inside the imprint into the panels. There's embossed ones, like on the one bottom right. And then the one version that we're going to show you, which is very different, and I haven't seen it done anywhere, that we would like to really push if you guys like it, is looking at doing a pin-mounted version, which is basically if you've ever seen pin-mounted letters to a sign or anything like that, and then backlighting it. So it's basically something that's sticking off the wall that has light back to it, and we'll get to that. But that's what those other images are showing. It's basically a cutout of metal. So you can add a different texture, different material than just concrete and paint. So this first one, so this is looking at your MSE panel. So when you drive up to the intersection on a cross street, you're going to see those MSE walls, those panels there. And this is basically looking at it, what you would see today if you didn't have any logos at all, what the wave scheme would look like at that point. We looked at, there's 5 different versions of this, not just this one, but different versions of these options. But what we looked at is we went back to talking with Colleen about some of the versions you guys gone through with the logo and things like that. And this is some of the alternative stuff that you guys looked at. And the really thing we pulled this one out is because it really lend itself to tying you to that wave scheme a little bit, which, you know, makes your theme more outreaching than anybody else's, because you would have a wave associated with your logo. This version, we dropped out the star that was inside of it, and then we added the established at the bottom. So you have Lamarque, the wave that ties you into the scheme, the Lamarque, Texas established 1953. The next one is the same, but we added a star back in. And when you start looking at this, the thing to think about on this one, and when you start talking about the star, is it really comes into play when you start looking at the other aspects that we could be applying this stuff to. When you start talking about the sound walls and some end of columns and things like that. So we'll get to that in a second, but keep that in mind when you're thinking about this one. And then even on this as well, we talked about things to keep in mind to maybe keep costs down, or how you implement this. If you're here, you already know you're in Texas, so do you need the Texas? Could you just have the established? That's something else you could think about. You could change up the text underneath it, drop text out. So that's pretty flexible.
I don't think we need Texas. I think at large, you're established 1953 in place of that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're all the way going over the causeway and you don't know you're in Texas yet, you probably ought to turn around.
At least we're on the same page, because we thought the same thing. The next version is playing a little bit off of, obviously, your city seal. You have the LM on there, as well as all your high schools play off the LM. So we looked at a couple versions of how that could work. And the key thing to all this is looking at how we got to make sure it all fits within the context of those panels. Those panels are like 5 by 10. So the more panels you touch, the more you're going to add cost, because you're going to have to change up more panels, and there's going to be a pattern you have to follow. And then the other thing is you want to look at is how that text falls. You don't want it to fall on a joint, because those joints are actually fairly large. If you had a text running through it, would have a gap in your text.
This is that same pin dot? This was
No,
still,
so the first two, sorry, let me back up. These first two, I think I broke it. Yep, I did.
the ones with just the text of Lamarque.
Yeah, so the first two versions. Did I break it? Nope. I dropped it. Sorry, guys. If you go back a couple for me real quick, so I can talk where you're doing it. The first two, what I was talking about, is those would actually be imprinted or cast into the wall and then painted. Is it working?
They pay for that, or we pay for it?
This is all this part you would have to pay for.
Okay.
Now, again, this is where you want to look at the aspect of trying to minimize, if you're really worried about cost, minimize how many panels you're touching. Because it's about, what did we say, $2,500 a panel typically? So this is actually imprinted in the panel and you paint on. So you see this all over the place. That's what that one that said League City said on it. They did it, they imprinted it. So this one's imprinted and painted, this is imprinted and painted. They're in the panels.
It's easier to maintain if you gotta repaint too, because your imprint's already there.
Yeah, and one key thing, and then you're gonna see this is the only downside to me with the whole wave scheme that they have, is blue. Painted blue exterior fades pretty quickly. They have, Lithochrome paint is pretty good about maintaining its color, but even then, your logo will probably do better than the paint that they're using. So your stuff wouldn't fade as much because of the paint we would use, but still, it's any of those bright colors, bright reds, yellows, blues, those things, those bright colors fade pretty bad in the sun is the unfortunate part.
You know, you spoke about the backlit a while ago. My personal opinion is we could eliminate this from the ground.
You could,
You know,
yes.
and that's a lot easier maintenance system. The backlit thing, you're locked into an illumination system behind whatever you're mounting, and then if it's metal, you're probably gonna have to use like a 430 stainless, you know, down here, and then attachments, everything tends to corrode.
Yeah.
So,
We would probably do it out of aluminum, so it would be light. So,
So when you're using the star between the A and the M.
Yep.
Then that star incorporates into.
elsewhere.
Elsewhere, like the towers and.
Yep, so I'm
So-
gonna jump ahead real quick. So like if we looked at this version, when you go to the sound wall or the end of the columns when you drive up, you could use that star elsewhere. So that's one way that it kind of starts tying it and being consistent throughout. So some of that key aspect, if you like that version, that's the only reason I would consider using the star is so that you can replicate that throughout and it ties it back to your logo.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's a different color. It's our colors.
Yeah.
I like that, but I do, my first question for it though is, if we were to fix something like that, would it then mean we start work on a new, I don't know if we call it the seal or the logo?
Yeah, correct.
With the spoonbill and the silhouette of the palm tree, because I feel like, that's, you know, I like the star and I think it's really simple and cool and I like the idea of it being blue and yellow to take our colors, but also it's really different than
Our logo.
One thing
our
I
logo.
Yeah, our seal is not going to show up well on the freeway.
I agree, I wouldn't want it to be on the freeway,
Yeah.
I think it would look,
And
I think it's too much detail.
I for one would be open to simplifying our logo. Although I really dig the one we have, it doesn't work well with what we're doing here. And if we're trying to identify Marque, I think less is more.
Yeah, so the conversation that Colleen and I have had about this is, there's a difference between print graphics and environmental graphics. Environmental graphics, usually the simpler the better, because it makes it bolder. When you start getting very intricate and you start talking about 55 mile an hour and how big those things have to be be able to read them, that's the trick. So this, obviously, if you do those letters at 2.5 feet tall, that's pretty straightforward, pretty clean. There's not much complication to it, and it's going to read. So that's the benefit of things like this and things like this, because these can be huge. These can be 3-foot letters on this version, and it's not that complicated. I do like this idea, this concept of doing a backlit cutout version, because it's different. And it would just make you guys stand out, because I don't know that anybody's done it. There is going to have to be some conversation with TxDOT, because it's never been done, so getting TxDOT to do stuff that they've never done is always fun. But doesn't mean it can't be done. So it's a question about being simple. I think we can make this work and make it look good. It's just going to be very intricate. So you're going to, go ahead.
So the question is, and I might be hearing you wrong, whatever we decide on, is that going to be consistent with our logo or our new logo? Because we want to.
Colleen, what do you think?
Okay, so, about a year ago, we entered into a contract with, what's the name? Man Love, thank you. Y'all remember that? When we were building our new brand style guide. And so the whole point of that was to come up with a mark that we can use for branding purposes. Remember, so we have our seal, we have our logo, that's on official things like your shirts and our agendas and stuff like that, but then we have a logo for branding purposes.
Gotcha.
That's good for things for wayfinding signs, TxDOT bridges, big, huge, environmental. Just, we don't want we don't want to overcomplicate things. We don't want to include our gateway to the Gulf in there. We just want people to know where they are. And so it never got much traction in that whole process, just due to it just didn't. And so I worked with Mammoth to build a brand style on what we already have, what we're already doing. So we focused on what can we get done instead of
Okay.
So this is actually one of those options that Manlove presented to us, but just didn't
This one.
make any traction. It didn't
That
even
one.
make it
That
to
one,
council.
yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah, the only thing we changed on this thing is we add the established, right?
Yes, and we
Yeah.
have some, I have some other options if you want to see them, but Manlove worked really hard, and this was the third round. This was one of 5 that made it to the third round, he's never made it back to y'all.
Okay.
So we keep these and we rebrand the freeway portion.
Yes, so basically we'll add a page into our brand style guide that's for environmental signage.
We just
Gotcha.
adopt a new one.
Yes, just like the fire station will have their own page with the fire station logo and their stuff, and the police department will have their own page.
Okay.
So this will just be for environmental signage.
Okay.
And if the colors will match our brand style guide,
Yeah.
to answer your question. We use the same PMS values, so people will start to see those colors. And they're pulled out of our existing logo.
Gotcha.
So we're using what we have and just creating something that works really good for outside. Does that help?
Yes.
ma'am.
Big time, thank you.
So that's what these 2 first versions were taken from that brand style guide and the options for environmental graphics and how they would apply.
Cool. Did it have the wavy underneath it too?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're still,
It's,
I'm seeing another, I'm seeing the light of day.
it's coming to fruition.
Yeah, they're giving us a free wave at the top.
That's what I'm saying, is that when we first
Why
saw
would we
this, we were
play
like,
off
hey,
that?
why not use this one? It basically takes the whole highway and makes it say Lamarque.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
will
the
you-
question is star or no star on that particular one.
Can you remind me, was there a version of the Lamar, of this one that instead of a star was the Texas
Yes.
shape?
Yes.
Just like our logo?
Yes.
Like, we're calling, I'm sorry, this is our logo, correct? Is
Yes,
that-
that's the seal.
That's the seal, this
This
is our
is your
logo.
logo, and this would be a mark for branding purposes.
This is our environmental wayfinding
Yes,
brand
thank you.
logo,
There you go.
mark.
But there was a version that had Texas on it, that little Texas on there.
I mean, I'm just
We're
spitballing, I
already
kind
know-
of.
We know we're here.
Well,
Back to the
I-
whole comment that the mayor said,
I
we're already
agree,
in
but I
Texas.
also, like, there is, this is where my Texas pride comes from, there is no state that is as cool looking as Texas, and there's a reason why Texans put it on everything, I think. But, and also, just, it does tie more to the logo, just in that our logo already has the Texas shapes on it. And it would still, did I see a version in here where, yeah, you had Texas symbols on the, I don't know if you're calling those tower, but the.
Yeah, you're talking about this version,
The yellow star.
this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe with color. I'm just
See
spitballing.
how much harder this is to read? Our logo is
Yeah.
extremely challenging
Yeah.
for marketing.
It looks sort of like a weird yin yang. I would
That's it.
certainly not want that on
It's very hard when you try, because when you start doing this stuff, you basically have to go positive, negative. You have to look at what's dark and what's not. And there's a lot of intricate detail, which works awesome when you can do full color like that. You could do full color like that up here, but it'd basically be printed and you'd have to put it on. And you're talking about maintenance, that's gonna be a maintenance item. And then painting it on would be a nightmare. So we kind of tried to go the other route, which is just positive, negative, which you do have a black and white version of it. But again, it's tough when you're going to go from a detailed graphic like that to environmental graphics and make it read.
Colleen, what's your favorite, star or no star?
I like the Lone Star. It tells you you're in Texas, and it makes us stand out a little bit more. Everybody loves the Lone Star, especially if there's a circle around it, you know, like that. The only thing, Alex brought up a great point, that it almost makes you wonder if it's like LA, like Louisiana. I know we know we're in Texas, but it almost separates it a little bit. But I like it because Lamarque is 2 words, and it will help solidify that Lamarque is spelled with a space between.
Which is your pet peeve?
It's not, it's just a mission.
Yeah, well, it's mine.
Man, that was great rebranding that you did just then. It's not a pet peeve, it's a mission.
Well, the
So
other-
that helps us with that quite a bit.
The other good thing with your star, it does tie it back to your seal too. So it does
It does
tie
tie
it back
to
to
the seal.
something that's elsewhere in your branding.
Well,
You
I
have
would
both.
cer-
You could do both.
I would certainly, I mean, I think that the star with the wave is great. I personally would,
Yeah.
I'm more down with the
And you
idea
wanna
of
keep
Texas
Texas.
shape. Just, well, like, the shape of Texas
Yeah, I didn't,
instead of the star.
there is a version in that. You have that
Like,
version?
I have a vague memory of seeing something like that, and I just like,
Another packet.
Gotcha.
I like that. I don't know if I would have said LA, but I'm on the same wavelength, sorry. That like our blue and yellow with the way there is like, I don't know, something about inserting a Texas back into it makes more sense for me. But really, it's not a mission of mine to.
But I think, whatever you guys have decided, because I think it works both ways on this. Because
Yeah,
if
for sure.
those stars go to little Texas outlines, it would work the same way.
Hello, honey. Are you watching? Which one do you like? Just kidding.
I thought he was serious. So, I mean, I think it sounds like we've landed, but just to run through this. So these other two were basically playing off the LM here and the LM off your high school stuff. And then the last one was that, taking the brand and the logo. But then this is how these could be tied to the sound wall version, which you have more flexibility, because you have the panels that you could deal with, the columns you could deal with, the end columns, and then trying to tie that same thing into, when you pull up to an intersection, you're gonna have those, what they call inverted Ts, where the columns come together, or the beams come in. Being able to translate that and paint that on there would also just replicate it again.
Is there one that has the LMs on top?
Yes, here.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you feel about doing the Marque with the waves and the stars. with
Yeah, that's
that
awesome.
LM. Because then you could be anywhere and be a star, but if it says LM, you know you're in the Marque still. Like, there's no question.
That's a great point.
That's awesome.
2 o'clock in the morning, when people are exiting certain places of alcohol, they need to know which side of the freeway they're on. They can look, oh, I'm in Texas City now. What?
But I was more thinking tourists and visitors and heads and
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Is Texas City using any TC anywhere?
Nope.
They're all lighthouses and,
Mostly lighthouses is the theme that we're using for them.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I love the LM.
We are using their seal, is it seal or logo, on the base of their identity markers. So the one thing that we haven't done in here, and I think it just became something that we didn't include in the scope going through, is we haven't done any identity marker design for you guys yet. So I think the first thing was trying to get as much as we could to where we can incorporate it, because I know TxDOT's pushing you guys pretty hard, trying to go through this and get that part incorporated. The next step would be, which, again, this is, a lot of this stuff, the only first step is what's TxDOT doing, so that you can get the benefit of them doing this project. Everything else we're showing you could be 10, 20-year master plan ideas. So, but the next piece that we haven't really designed, and we don't have anything to show you, we have placeholders for, are those large identity markers and smaller identity markers, which we did do for Texas City. We did do that design for them. So that's where the lighthouse thing came from. That part is not in here for you guys today.
Would the LM version within the state, could that be used, if we bracketed the city limits on north and south end with Lamarck, and then maybe the state on the other ones?
Like if you're doing on those, what those identity markers are. So you have, that's what I'm getting at, is you have unlimited
Are you saying
identity, what you could do on those big things. The key is, what you have to watch is, I think on the north, we're talking about, we would want an easement from that property owner that's the furthest north, right? Because do you guys own that corner?
Which one, I'm sorry?
The one furthest north, 1764.
No.
Okay.
We would work with them if that was.
Okay. To try to possibly get an easement for you guys to do branding up there. The key is, if you can not do it in a TxDOT right away, you could say Lamarck on it all day. The key is, if you're doing any branding like this, big branding, and it's in the right of way, and you can see it from the freeway, it can't have words on it.
distraction.
It can only be what they call sculptural. So, for example, the lighthouse for Texas City, when you're on the freeway, it doesn't have any words on it. It's a lighthouse. In Pearland, when we're doing it, it's basically a sculpture with a pear on it, for example. So most of those don't have words on them. They got rid of it. The last one we did that had words on it was all the ones we did for Stafford. That was probably the last time we put words on them. Now, even Sugarland doesn't have, and most of them are sculptural nowadays. If you can get them on what I would call private property or your property, you can do whatever you want.
So Lighthouse versus the Lagomar entrance sign. Lagomar thing is on private property.
Yep.
And you can, it says Texas City and Lagomar over it. But the lighthouse does not say Texas City on it.
So the big thing for this idea, thought process behind this would be, hopefully on those, the ones that, on the north and south and maybe in the middle, we could hopefully get them in an area where you have an easement to do them, and you can do whatever you want for the larger ones. And then the ones that are in the right of way for TxDOT, they're more of a sculptural entity of the concept. But they still say Lamarck in some form or fashion.
Mayor, the logos for the school, when they have put just Lamarck, don't they use the same staggered? Is that-
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what they got it.
Yeah.
I
That-
like the idea of maybe incorporating that LM in certain areas and then the shape of Texas or Star in other places.
And we did two versions of this. So this one's where they're disconnected with the established underneath the L, which if you're just doing the LM, you may not need the established at all.
This won't work for us, it doesn't say Lamarck.
Okay.
On the MSC panels, it needs to
Say
say the
Lamarck.
words Lamarck
Okay.
somewhere.
Yeah.
So you're just
That's my
talking about the
mistake. Yeah.
other pieces? Okay.
Yes, sir, yeah.
So you're really just talking about the LM and potentially the LM with this Texas around
Yeah,
it?
and yeah, at the top of the
Yeah.
thing with this.
So the only difference
Like
between
the
this one is
tower.
we interlock the L and the M, kind of like some of the high schools have done.
Yeah, I like that idea of the LM within the state of Texas on the tower portions, and then taking advantage of their free wave with our Lamarck. And I like the star, and I like it without the star. Star is kind of cool because it gives an additional color, and those are our colors.
I like it.
And I'd have to go back all the way to the beginning of this presentation, but the one that I showed you, the examples of some of the sound walls that they've already done on TxDOT, they've already done some with the star on it, but they aren't painted. They're just like a relief of a star.
Yeah.
We can go back and look at that before we're done, but you could do it that way as well if you didn't want to paint it.
Would they, out of curiosity, would they allow so what are we calling them when they're at the top? What is, just
Are you talking about the
The
column
star.
on the right or the walls?
both of them?
Both of them, okay.
Would
For
it?
two different things. So,
Yeah, what are
for
their
example, the
names?
one on the right would probably have to be painted on because it's the end of a structural member of the highway.
Got you.
They're not gonna probably let us do a form liner kind of thing on those. The column caps that are on those columns,
Could be
you
imprinted.
have more flexibility in what you can do.
Those could be imprinted and
Yeah.
painted or
Yeah.
something. Is it possible to do, do they ever allow like for, the length of the wall between two intersections, it's all stars, and then, under this one on the right, that's the LM, like could it be different images?
Yes. You can kind of do whatever you want. The key for me is you want to be as consistent as possible because
Right.
the point is every place you drive or every place you see it, you want to think of the same thing. I wouldn't want to, I don't know that you want to say, have 4 different pieces of it.
I was just wondering if it would, and I get what you're saying, maybe
Yeah.
it would be just too distracting, but like have LMs at overpasses and then stars or
That
Texas
that
shapes
could be
all the way
possible.
along.
Yes.
And then I have one more question about some of the landscaping,
Okay, let me back up.
please. First of all,
This-
I'm extremely excited to see such an incorporation of some native landscaping. That gives me all kinds of happiness. But, I just wanted to know, like, if we wanted to incorporate more native landscaping and some trees and some grasses and shrubs that are a way to set us apart a little bit more than the landscaping for all of the other municipalities that are around us, like crepe myrtles and the same things that you see over and over again. They're all really beautiful, and I don't
Yeah.
have any problem with them, but thinking a little more of how could we set ourselves even further apart just through our landscaping? Is that, like, what's the cost relationship there? Like, how much leeway do we have, and how much lead time do we need to provide?
None, because this probably is the piece that you have the most time on, because with landscape, all we have to do is tell them, hey, we want to work with TxDOT on landscape. And we have a very good relationship with Dana, who's the landscape architect for TxDOT. And when it comes down to this, basically what they do and the way that they work is they have a road budget that's doing most of this work that you're talking about. Then they set aside, typically it's 1%, I think, 1% of the construction budgets of the highway. So whatever 1% of the construction is of this project goes to landscape. So that would be Dana's budget to do this work. And the way-
What is our total? Alex, you told me, I think at 110.
I have it here.
1% of so many million?
Dana actually told me it was 0.5%.
Is it
We need to
0.5% on this?
confirm that.
Okay.
Our concern on 1764 is that Texas City has taken a considerable amount of the landscaping budget for that project for the flyover in the Lago Mar intersection. So we wanted to ensure that we get our fair share of that 1%.
Yeah.
And I talked to Dana, and he said it's a mathematical formula that they use, and that everybody will get their cut, and not to worry, and that they love Lamar, and hopefully that if they, if we, Dana's easy to work with. So I have the budget totals here of each section of the highway, and the 1764 is the largest, and it's a big, huge chunk. And so we will have some for a splash there. We can add to it.
Yeah, and you can do over and above. So,
Okay.
and the way that Dana does this, he's really flexible. Like, the way we've done a couple of them, and the way we're doing them most recently is, if you guys have us design the landscape the way you want it, we basically give him the drawings, he bids it and installs it.
Cool.
And they use their funding to do it. And all you really do is have us design it the way you want. They review it, as long as it meets their criteria, there's little to no other issues. They're basically bidding it for you and installing it for you. And then you have that budget, either it's 0.5%, 1%, whatever it is. And then the question would be, if you're doing something crazy, ridiculous over and above what they normally would do, they would probably charge you, make sure you're paying for that part. But typically what they want, they'd rather pay for upfront the installation of it, because they know that you guys want to enter into a maintenance agreement to maintain it. They want somebody to maintain the stuff rather than paying for it. They don't have a problem paying to be installed, they just don't have people to maintain it. That's why they install what they install, because they don't have to maintain any of it. They don't maintain any of it. They let whatever grows, and it looks good. And that's what Dana's done through his whole career, is figured out a way to do this mass planting. He's the one that designed all this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that you can tell with some of the perennials that they've chosen, like, you can tell that they're not planning on someone going out there and putting out petunias on a regular basis.
Exactly.
But, I
So-
just, I know that I have this sort of a broken record for me, this situation, but, I think that eye-catching landscaping and trees are one of the best ways for us to immediately, not just 5 years down the road, but 50 years down the road, let people know, like, you're in Lamarck, it's green, it's lush, it's beautiful. And we also, can incorporate things that give us a leg up, that are known for, increasing pollinator habitat, stuff that just not only sounds good for the city to have done, but is also actually good for the city to have done.
And it's much easier for Colleen to do her job, to sell the economics of Lamarck if they drive into it and it looks good, and they know you're maintaining it, they know it's going to be maintained well, they're not going to have a problem bringing their business here. So it works on both sides. So I've seen this. We're working for the Economic Development Corporation in Pearland and in Texas City. So that's what they're doing. They're coming from that aspect of it anyway. So they're doing it on how they're trying to bring people in. It's not just, that's the added benefit of what you're talking about with the habitat and the way it looks in general. So it's about trying to do all of it together.
So the long and short of it is there's not a huge rush on that.
No.
Okay.
The key is just to make sure that they know that you want to do it and show them that we're making progress. There's no key that you have to make a final decision on landscaping here today. We could have a year's worth of meetings on landscape if you wanted to before you got to anything.
I'm sure that's what everybody wants.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying.
Well, actually, we could morph the tree committee into the landscape committee, and that would be you and Robert.
No, I like it.
So-
Finding something different, that's the hard part.
Without objection, we'll do that, although it's not an agenda item, but this is a workshop, so we're just forming consensus on that. I think we need to continue this conversation as the weeks and months go by, because we have another presentation, and it's 10 after, so if
Okay.
you wouldn't mind, if you'll coordinate with Colleen,
Okay.
all these different ideas, and then she can come to us individually, or we can discuss it at our meetings coming up monthly. And thank you. So,
problem.
I've already looked at the numbers in the back, by the way, so.
They're pretty big, I know.
Yeah, I don't think we want to ruin our appetite looking at those this evening.
Are any of those numbers payable by TxDOT?
Yeah, so that's why,
I mean, how do we differentiate what we would be looking at out of this?
so for example, the landscape numbers, for example, are pretty big numbers. But just remember that a big chunk of that, if not all of it, is going to come from TxDOT.
We're just maintaining.
You just have to agree to maintain it.
Unless we
How
decide
about
to do
the,
a whole lot of extra stuff.
Unless you agree to let them do whatever they want and then let them maintain it however they want. which
How
is- you've seen what that-
cost-effective for us is the fountains in the detention ponds?
So over excavating the ponds is usually a big number because it's a big area. I think if you look at those budgets and you look at that, there's probably $500,000 or $600,000 every series of ponds. So that's a big number up front. After that, it's pretty minimal because you have a floating fountain that's about 60 grand a piece, and then you're maintaining the water level. That's pretty much all there is. So you have a little bit of maintenance with it. It's a lot more upfront cost on those because you're paying for extra excavation. Now, when they're bidding it, that number could come way down because if they're bidding it up front and they're already digging a hole, there may not be, you're probably going to get better numbers than you think when you're bidding a big project because they're bidding, was it $200-300 million project, so.
So basically, we pick what we want, and then if TxDOT's already doing it, we just pay the difference.
Gotcha.
So if they're already doing that detention pond, we want it deeper, we just pay for the deeper.
Yeah.
And so.
Kind of like the next discussion we're getting ready to have about the infrastructure.
And the key is too, just because they price it doesn't mean you have to do it. You could tell them, I'm not paying for it, and then they'll do what they're already planning on doing, so.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Detention to,
Because they're doing excess,
they dig
cover.
it for the water to evaporate or drain off.
Yeah, they're basically detained, because they're adding impervious cover to this corridor, they have to have a certain amount of excess.
So if we
detained.
want to maintain it with floating fountains and to maintain a water level, they're going to have to treat the bottom of those ponds.
Yeah, so hopefully they're already hitting clay. I don't know if they have clay down here already. The ones
Plenty of
we've done
clay.
Yeah, everywhere else, we haven't had a problem with it. They hold water anyway. But the key is that we're going to dig below their detention capacity to create the ponds.
This was great.
So you'll continue to coordinate with Colleen? We're so thrilled that we approve the hiring of your consulting firm.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We always love to hear
Texas
that.
City was kind of eking out ahead of us a little bit, so we had to hurry up and do something. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you, Colleen, for recommending them. And I'm sure we'll see much more of you guys in the future. This is exciting stuff.
Appreciate it.
And
Thank you.
we do have more frontage on the highway than anyone else
You
in
do. You
Galveston
have a
County.
lot. That's why your number's so big.
But we're looking to you to be our advocate, so
That's what we're
the
doing.
mark on top of Texas City on the signs,
Yeah.
y'all have to speak for that.
Well, the last few images in there are just some ideas of what that could look like if you implemented that stuff. So that's just kind of some vision stuff for you guys.
Very exciting.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next item on our agenda, item B, presentation discussion given by Attico Consulting Engineers regarding proposed upsizing improvement of the water line and sanitary sewer system for the I-45 expansion project, and provide direction to city manager. Our direction to you on item A, city manager, is ongoing discussions and continuation. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm Randy Liska, and I'm here for Den. He unfortunately had a conflicting schedule, so as you know, TxDOT is in the process of doing the design on the roadway. their design engineer, Excelsis, has asked for information regarding the city's utility crossings for TxDOT. And it's my understanding that TxDOT is going to pay for the cost of modifying the crossings as long as there's no upsizing or other modification to them. There are 3 areas that we're kind of looking at as far as modifying what's already there. The first one is for the sanitary sewer. There's a 24-inch sanitary force main that crosses under 45 at Bayou Road, and that carries the sewage that's being pumped from the 6th Street lift station to the wastewater treatment plant. What we're recommending is that an additional crossing be put in the same area as that 24-inch sanitary sewer, so that if you ever have to do any maintenance or have an issue with the existing force main, you'll have something in place that you can keep the system up and running while you're doing that maintenance, repairs, whatever that may entail.
Sure.
And then we have 2 areas on the water line that we're looking at. The first area is at Cedar Drive, and you have an 8-inch crossing under 45, which has, if I'm not mistaken, an 8-inch and a 6-inch coming into it on the east side and a 10-inch on the west side. We're recommending that the 8-inch be upsized to a 12-inch for capacity, as well as providing system stability in that area. And then the second area is at FM 519, and there's a 8-inch and a 14-inch on the east side of 45, going under 45. And what we're recommending is that those 2 lines be combined into a 16-inch line, which would reduce maintenance in that area, as well as provide additional capacity and stability for the system.
What are those 2 sizes, 8-inch and 14?
An 8-inch and a 14-inch, and it, on the east side, it's an 8-inch and a 14-inch, and on the west side, it looks like it goes into an 8-inch and a 12-inch, upsizing in between the 2 to a 16-inch would reduce the amount of pipes underneath the roadway that you'd have to maintain, and provide stability to the system.
16-inch going to give enough capacity for future?
I believe it will have enough capacity for the future.
I mean, you're talking about reducing the capacity right now from 8 and a 14 combined, and putting them into a 16?
Putting it in, yes, sir, putting it into a 16.
What's TxDOT's role in this? They pay for the excavation and cover up, and we pay for the pipe, or?
On the, if you're upsizing or improving the line, I believe that for the most part it would be the city's cost. On the 2 lines being put into one, and talking with Ben, he thought that since it was decreasing the amount of maintenance and whatnot, the state may pay for the trade out of the 2, but on the other 2, it would be, per city's cost for upsizing the lines or adding the line.
What does that cost?
I do not have that cost at this point in time. That's something that we still need to look at.
Hundreds of thousands, millions?
I wouldn't think millions, but depending on the line, it could be upwards of, 100,000 or slightly more.
Couple of 100,000 tops.
Yeah, I would think so.
And that's money that could come from the county bond, which is for mobility and infrastructure. I'd like to hear more about this. Maybe if it's not time sensitive as far as TxDOT is concerned, we could revisit this again at our next meeting. Is that good with you guys?
I don't see why not. I know that it's my understanding that there's a meeting with TxDOT this Thursday.
Correct.
In regards to discussing upsizing of the lines as well as conflicts
Right.
along the corridor, so, but I wouldn't think it would be an issue to discuss it at the next meeting.
May I ask Beck a question? Mr. Shea, isn't it the difference in what they would normally install to the upgrade, not the full cost? It's the difference,
That's my
correct?
understanding, yes, ma'am.
That's what so if they were going to install an 8-inch pipe and we want to make it 12, we pay the difference between 8 and 12, at least that's what
Right.
That
our
was my
understanding
understanding as well.
Yeah.
I'd like a little bit more info on how we get more capacity out of reducing the size of the pipe from a 8 and a 14, to a 16, or is one of those existing pipes not being utilized?
Are they
I'm not
joined-
getting
are they
enough
joined together?
information, and to me, that doesn't,
They're
that's a
separate
square
pipes.
peg in a round hole.
They're separate pipes, and Randy's an engineer, could probably explain this better than I could. But the pressures and all that everything else being equal, the amount of water you get through the pipe has to do with the diameter.
This is your force main, right?
No, this would,
Water
line.
supply.
About the
water supply.
So it's the old pi r squared formula. So that a 16-inch line will basically carry 4 times as much as an 8-inch line.
Okay.
So the 16-inch line that they're describing will roughly equate to a 14 and an 18. It's kind of counterintuitive, but when you look at the actual geometry of the cross-sectional area of the pipe, they're pretty close. Everything else being equal. If the
Yeah.
pressures on either side are equal, and
Okay.
these guys will get head loss and hydraulic grade lines and all that stuff they do for a living, but the basic difference is just the diameter of the pipe.
Okay.
And it may not increase the capacity a huge amount, but, it would be equal or slightly greater than having the 2 pipes.
Thank you very much, sir. And we'll, Robert, if you'd like to attend that meeting on the 17th, you're welcome
Where are y'all
to.
meeting at?
TxDOT office.
Washington Avenue?
Yes, sir, it's up in Washington.
Did y'all talk about the boxes underground for drainage rolling about there?
No.
So I don't know if this meeting is a utility meeting, and drainage is considered a utility or not. TxDOT promised Councilman Mitch Fitch larger boxes,
Yeah.
and we wrote that article in Marque about it, and we're gonna put the plugs in it until
I never could get their contract engineer to give me a call. Doesn't answer his phone, a guy named Keck. He's the one supposed to be doing the drainage design. Because we met with them back a year ago, December, about that, to increase that capacity. Because that's critical to draining this city.
Well, whoever's at the 17th meeting,
I'll go.
they're all going to be in the same building.
Okay.
So,
And I look forward to having more information when we have this presented to us again, but could you just summarize for me again, because I got lost in the discussion, of what is the reason for the recommendation of the change?
On the sanitary sewer, you have a 24-inch force main going underneath the TxDOT right-of-way. If you would have a maintenance issue with that line, you really don't have another avenue to pump the effluent from the lift station to the wastewater treatment plant. And so adding that line in
I see.
would allow
This is a
a
safe.
bypass of the line underneath the roadway, which would allow you to do the maintenance on the main line.
Okay, that sounds sensible. Thank you.
Great.
Add to that?
Go ahead.
Oh, what Randy's describing, I'm sure most of you already know, on the force main, a force main is a sewer pipeline that's being pumped under pressure, in this case from the 6th Street lift station. And again, I'm sure you all already know, but pretty much most of the east side of town, all the sewage goes through the pipes and the mains and ends up at the 6th Street lift station. And from there, it's pumped under the interstate and over to the wastewater plant. So what they're recommending is a redundancy, so that instead of having one single pipeline for the sewage to get from the 6th Street lift station to the wastewater plant, we would have two.
Yeah. And
On the wastewater side. On the water side, what they're recommending, again, at the Cedar Drive crossing, you've got basically 6 water mains that come together and cross under the interstate as one 8-inch water main. They want to upsize that and make that bigger.
to the 14.
That's at the
The
12.
12, it would be a 12.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
At
At the
Cedar.
Cedar
Going-
Drive.
Yeah,
crossing.
Okay.
going from 8 to 12.
That's
Okay.
16 at
Thank you.
What time's that meeting, Thursday?
I'll send you the invitation.
Okay, if you'll send it to me. And I'll ask the questions about who's paying what.
I believe the meeting's 1:30, sir. Thursday.
I'll be there. I'll meet y'all there.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Appreciate you doing that, Robert. If there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn until 6 o'clock for our regular meeting. Thank you.